Topping our news this hour, with schools back in session across the Suncoast, violence and bullying can unfortunately be a part of the new year, with reported attacks happening each day across the country.
Suncoast students are learning how to fight back against bullies before it gets out of hand. Let's go live now to Jess Dowdrick on Fruitville Road at Clark's Self-Defense with more on this story. Jess?
Good morning, Jacqueline and Ray. Believe it or not, kids are learning the same self-defense techniques that adults are. That way, if there are any issues walking to school, on the playground, or wherever they may be, they know how to defend themselves. Throughout the morning today, I'm going to introduce you to 4 different self-defense moves that these kids are learning. Take a look. This is the first one. This move is called the rear choke. Now, as you watch, you see the attacker ambush the victim from behind, putting his arm around her throat and attempting to choke her. To defend herself, the victim puts her hand on her attacker's arm to protect her windpipe, pulling down on them. Then the victim traps the attacker's legs with hers, locking him in place, allowing her to force the man to the ground, give him a quick stomp, and then runs for help.
We try to help them learn techniques in role playing and drills so they're comfortable, so when the situation does happen, they'll be able to muscle memorize and say, all right, I've seen that before.
Clark says that these self-defense moves also build a lot of confidence in the kids. Of course, we couldn't get any students to provide a demonstration for us because they are all back in school, but coming up again at 5:30, we'll show you a different move that these kids are learning to defend themselves.
Topping our news this hour, violent attacks and bullying are all too often part of going back to school.
Some Suncoast students are learning techniques to defend themselves. Let's go live now to Jess Dowdrick, live on Fruitville Road at Clark's Self-Defense. Jess, good morning.
Good morning, Jacqueline and Ray. This morning I'm taking you through some self-defense moves that students on the Suncoast are learning here at Clark's Self-Defense. And believe it or not, it's the same moves that adults learn. That way, if something happens on their way to school or on the playground or wherever they may be, they're able to protect themselves. Just a few minutes ago, I showed you a move called the rear choke. Let's take a look at another one. In this scenario, the victim is on a run when an attacker comes from behind her, taking her to the ground. Clark says it's important to face your attacker when you can to identify him or her. In this situation, the victim uses her legs to grip the attacker's neck and choke him until she feels safe enough. Then she lets go of her grip, hitting the attacker with her feet as she flees.
It's so important to have that confidence level where kids feel so confident that they don't even need to engage in any kind of serious situation where if they see trouble, they walk away. I tell my kids, best thing to take the high road.
Now, Clark says you always need to be alert of your surroundings because once an attacker gets in your comfort zone, they're already too close. Now, coming up at 6 o'clock, I'll show you yet another move that these students are learning to protect themselves.
Topping our news this morning, with schools back in session across the Suncoast, violence and bullying can unfortunately be a part of the new school year, with reported attacks happening across the country.
Suncoast students are learning how to fight back before they're put in one of those unfortunate situations. Let's go live now to Fruitville Road. Jess Dowdrick outside of the Clark's Self-Defense. Jess?
Good morning, Jacqueline and Ray. I've showed you guys 2 different self-defense techniques that students are learning, and believe it or not, it's the same moves that adults are learning. That way, if something happens when they're on their way to school, on the playground, or wherever they may be, they're prepared to protect themselves. Here's a third one I want to show you today. In this scenario, the victim is attacked from behind, but is able to turn and identify her attacker. Then the man threatens to choke the victim, but the victim keeps her hands at face level to slap, hit, and keep the attacker's hands away from her. From there, the woman tries to pin the attacker's arm so she can fight back using quick, short strikes. Then she hooks the attacker's arm, slamming him to the ground. She consistently throws knees and punches through the fight until she can get away.
Kids these days, high school, even middle school level, people are bringing things to school that shouldn't be there. You hear about it all the time. People bringing knives to school, guns to school, and it's really important to know what to do if that situation happens.
Now, of course, our student demonstrators were not available to do the demonstration for you because they are all back in school. But Clark recommends that not just kids, but adults as well, when they're running, that they keep their headphones out of their ears. That way they're fully aware of what's happening around them. Now, coming up at 6:30 in just a few minutes, I'll show you yet another move.
Violent attacks and bullying are all too often a part of going back to school.
Some Suncoast students are learning techniques to defend themselves before they're in the wrong case scenario. Let's go live now to Jess Dowdrick on Fruitville Road at Clark's Self-Defense. Jess?
Good morning, Jacqueline and Ray. Already this morning, I've shown you 3 different self-defense techniques that kids are learning. I have one more for you here this morning. Now, believe it or not, kids are learning the same techniques that adults are. That way, if something happens when they're walking to school, when they're on the playground, or wherever they may be, they're ready to defend themselves. Take a look at this. This is the worst case scenario. A weapon is involved. In this incident, an attacker approaches the victim with a knife. The victim tries to convince the attacker to put the weapon down, but he won't. So she grabs the attacker's wrist with her hands, holding the grip tight. She gets behind her attacker and pins the knife to his body. Once it's pinned, the victim puts the man into what's called an armbar, knocking the knife out of his hand before fleeing.
And you have to remember, in a fighting situation, there's no pretty techniques. Everything that looks flashy and, oh, he pulled it off and didn't get cut is false. You're going to be in a struggle, you might get surprised, you'll get hit. You need to stay engaged and work inside the fight.
Now, unfortunately, we couldn't get some students to show you those techniques because, as you know, they're all back in school. But again, they're learning the same things that adults are. Now, Clark says if there is a weapon involved, if you are attacked, that always give them whatever they want, if it's money or material things. Now, it's different if they want you to come with them. He says to never do that, that you're less likely to survive if you're taken to a secondary location.